Hello and welcome. My name is Matthew Marquit, and in this third video of the Alpha Textures tutorial series, I want to show you guys how you can create a tree. And this is kind of an example of a tree that I created with the, you can see actually right here, I use triangles to create each one of these. If I select the whole model, kind of get a better quick gauge of it. If I hit F3, we can see it. The only thing that's full on 3D is the trunk right here, and then all of these are planes. Okay, so I just have a bunch of different planes that literally make up every one of the branches. Okay, so let's kind of go over the process. Now the major thing here is, of course, you want to make, and if I was to say take this object here, duplicate it out, you're going to want to make a trunk. Now there's a couple ways of making a trunk for the tree. You can start off by using a cylinder and then box modeling it. So you can kind of go in there and do that, and then kind of extrude out some roots on the bottom. This tree I was trying to make look good from full 360, right? So no matter which angle you look at it, it kind of has an interesting look to it, instead of just like the straight tree that kind of goes up. So this one is a little bit more stylized than most trees. Some trees will have just a little bit more straight kind of form factor, but keep that in mind when you're modeling. But you can kind of see right here, if I put the polys back on it, I just kind of went on the bottom there and just extruded those polygons out, and then just kind of bent them down a little bit when I extruded them, and then delete the bottom. Of course, you never need to see the bottom of the roots of the tree, so we kind of get rid of that. And then I used a tiling texture and just kind of lined it up. So you can see right here, this is the texture. You can see where the seams are, but because I lined them up kind of subtly, it's kind of hard to tell. So even if you spin all the way around the actual trunk, it's hard to see where the seam is. But there is one, of course, right here. But once again, you can get away with that if it's like the eye just kind of bleeds it together, as you can see it does on this model. Now the texture, actually, and let me take a look over here. So the texture of the actual trunk looks like this. Okay, so this is just the tiling texture. I just found this kind of cool image and then just made it tile. So it has like this, you know, kind of weird kind of bark effect, more dimensional than just a flat bark. All right, but you guys can choose whatever you want. But the idea really for the bark is you just make a tiling bark texture, and then you apply it to whatever base you created. So as I said before, this was box modeled by using the cylinder and then extruding the base of it and kind of making cuts and bends and whatever. I don't need to go through the whole process. You guys should know something to that effect. However, I do want to quickly show you guys what you could do, and I've mentioned this in other videos as far as lofts are concerned, but another way to make a tree base is lofts, and that's the more kind of maybe the different way that you guys might not know, so that's why I want to show that real quick. But lofts are kind of cool and pretty simple. So if we come over here to our creation tab, we want to make sure that we choose the second option, which is splines, and then what we're going to do is we are going to choose a line. So we'll just come in here and we'll draw a shape. So keep in mind that when you're drawing splines, you always want to be in an orthographic view, which means like a top or a front or something. So I'm going to go into top view here, hit T for top. Okay, and we'll just do this so we can make a shape of a trunk. So I'm just going to kind of click. If I hold my mouse, it allows me to kind of edit the curve of it. So we can click, hold the mouse down, do that. I can come over here, do it again. We can make something that isn't perfectly cylindrical, right? Something to like this, and then go back to the original point. It's going to ask if you want to close it, hit yes, and that's a nice shape. Now, of course, you can always edit any of these. It's like working with vectors in Photoshop. We can go to the line here under the modify panel, grab any of these vertices, and move these little, if it's not moving, that's because we're kind of locked on a grid. So we'll just click on our move tool right here, just click in the middle like this, and then we should be able to click on it and move it. So if you do kind of get them locked and they're not moving, you can do that. See how both handles move at the same time though? There's all these different things you can do. If you right click in any of these vertices, we can do Bezier corner, which will allow us to move these independent of each other, so they can go that way. Bezier, which is what we just saw before, where it will move both at the same time. Corner, which doesn't have any roundness at all, just make a hard cut between them. And then smooth, which you can't control at all the roundness. It just kind of interpolates it depending on wherever the two other points are, right? So that's how you can do that. You can manipulate it, do whatever you want. We'll do another smooth on this one. I mean, that's good enough, right? We don't need to sit here and fool around. You get the idea. So just make a closed shape, okay? So this would be known as our shape. Now what we're going to do is I'm actually going to hit F for front view, and we're going to do the actual trunk of the tree, okay? So this will be called the line or the path. So we'll go in here and we'll grab, and we'll actually create another line, and we'll start off with a straight line. Usually you want it to come off straight off the ground. I'm going to hold shift and make a point that's still straight off the ground. So just a little bit, and then we can come up and then start curving it. All right, so we can do a curve where it kind of comes out like this, and then goes this direction, and I'll zoom out just a little bit, maybe there, whatever, right? So there's the idea. Now remember though, it's three-dimensional, so if we kind of look to the side, there really doesn't have anything going on. So if we come over here, grab our line, grab our vertices, we can come over here and manipulate those so that these are a little bit more interesting also in different angles and so on. Okay, so just try to make it look good from a full 360, not just from one view, okay, or one direction. So let's pull that one out, and whatever. Maybe I'll just move this one with it because it looks a little odd. It's curving like that. But whatever. I mean, most trees are not going to move like that, but I just want to make something dramatic so it's obvious. Okay, so we have our shape and we have our path. So in order to do a loft, we come back over here, and we're going to choose our geometry again, and we're going to change this from standard primitives to compound objects, and you'll see loft right here. Now what I typically like to do is I like to choose the shape. So we'll grab the shape here, click on loft, and then it'll ask you get path or get shape. So you get the opposite. Since we got shape, we'll hit get path and select the path, and you'll see that it will create this object that is that shape following this path. Now this clearly does not look like a tree trunk, but I want to show you some of the things that you can do with it to make it more or less look like the tree trunk. Now once you've created that, we can go over to the modified panel with our loft and go over to deformations, and we can play around with scale. So we're going to turn scale on, click on the scale button, and this is our little dope sheet that shows us that it's 100% at the beginning, 100% at the end. Well, maybe we want it to be thicker than 100% at the bottom so that it gets pretty fat. And then what we can do is we can take this and drop this all the way down to 0, so that it gets really thin at the top, and now we've got more of a shape that looks like what could be a trunk. All right, so if you go in the negative, it's going to look a little odd, especially if you cross here, because this is where it hits 0 and then it starts going in the negative. So always be careful of where you're placing your point on your dope sheet. But we can kind of move it like this, and you can add other points by clicking on this what looks like a little explosion here, insert point. So we can insert a point here if we want to, and then we can move it so that it quickly goes and then stays the same thing. It looks more like a hair or something like that, but you can play around with it, or the other direction and make it really thick for a while and then thin down, right? But we'll just leave that as is or close to the default. You can do other ones like twist. Let's just say we put on a twist and we turn that on. If you twist it, this is 100% goes a full 360 all the way around. If we lift this way up, right, and we kind of scale up here, you can see I can actually twist the model a bunch and create this kind of cool twisty effect, right, to it. So you can create these kind of really gnarly looking trees or concepts behind that. Then let's just say the poly count. Okay, so default poly count, little high, right? So we want to be obviously wary of that. If we take a look over here on the side, we can play around with some of these things. You have your surface parameters, skin parameters. Down here is what we want to look for. And you see the shape steps and path steps. If you actually drop that number down, it will drop the amount of polys that are in the model. And then if we drop the path steps down, same thing, right? So we can have a much lower polygon tree. So we want to be careful of that. And then this is closer to the amount of polys that this one is, right? And so you can see I get a very similar shape to that. Well, this one was box modeled, but this one was a loft. Now the other cool thing about a loft is it does unwrap itself. I do show that in a separate video. So if you want to take a look at that, but just real quick, just so you guys know where that is, you actually take a look under the surface parameters where it says apply mapping. You put your checker texture on it, and then you can repeat it in length and width depending on how much you want, and it unwraps itself. Once you do that, then I would collapse it down. So after you've got it unwrapped, then I collapse it down to an editable poly, and then we can come in here and say grab some polys down here and extrude them, right? So we can grab a couple of polys, extrude them out, right, and make it something like this, right, and then we can just hit plus a bunch of times, check, and then you can make this a root, right? So we can, what I would typically do, of course, was delete the bottom, so we get the bottom deleted there, and then what I would also do is I would start welding some of these, so we'll do edge weld, so we can do a target weld from edge to edge, right? So we can grab, oops, we're not working here. So click on that, we'll do a target weld, this edge to this, well, let's just do vertices since it's being silly on me. So we'll come over here and I can do a target weld like such so that we can kind of have a more capped off top or whatever. So when we're extruding out these roots, we can do that, right? And then we want to flare these bottom parts out, so we can grab all of these edges down here. Let me just flare them out just a little bit. So if I was to say go like this and move them out a little bit, maybe something to this effect, then grab these and move them out a little bit, and then move them something like that, so on. And then of course we want it to go down and collapse on itself, so same thing. Actually I would grab all the polys on the end like this and then do a weld, and then just increase the amount of the weld until they all snap into a point, and hit check, and then move that down, line that up, so it's a little bit more flat, and then we can just kind of slowly make this shape more like a root, right? So it's kind of coming out. So you kind of play around with the shapes and so on. Then you can use such things as soft select to bend it. So maybe we come in here and I do soft selection. So we'll see the section down here that says soft selection, turn it on. We can grab like parts of the geometry down there, and you see it's only affecting a little bit, so the color is showing you how much it affects it. I can increase the fallout until it's affecting more of the geometry, like probably up to there might be a little better, and then I can move it. I'm going to switch this back from view to world, my coordinates, and try to move this here. Whoops, it's being a little weird, so we'll try this. So we get a little bit of a bend there, maybe grab some of these polys and pull them out a little bit, and so on. So that's basically how you can get those roots. So that's kind of what I did to create these shapes, you know, extrude them out from a couple different places. Of course, I made these roots absolutely ginormous. We wouldn't want that this big. In comparison to the tree, these roots are like just as long as the tree itself. So that would be a little silly. I'd shut off soft selection here and then potentially just scale down everything I did there, and then move it in a little bit so it didn't feel so big. Something to that effect, and whatever, right? Play off of that, but you get the idea. So that's kind of how you would create the base of the tree. You'd unwrap it, you put your tiling texture on it, and so that's kind of where we go with, whoops, let me switch this back over. So that's where you'd get this, right? So we'd get this this part done. Then all the branches, and now theoretically keep in mind that depending on the size of the tree and how close the player can get, you might want to model some of the major branches. I don't have any branches modeled out. These are all alpha textures, but you could model out some of the branches too, but don't do too many of them. Just a couple of them, and then use your alphas to kind of fill in the leaves and the smaller branches. So how do you create this part, right? The top part, right? So now that we've figured out how we create the base of the trunk, how do we do that? Well, let's go over to my texture over here, and let me shut this one off. And so here's a little demo that I created. Now, first things first, you can trace an existing branch. You can find one and cut it out. But I'm going to show you, because I want to teach you a couple of concepts while I'm doing this, how you can paint your own and then to make it look realistic. So like I said, it's not necessarily the process you want to do. I'm not saying you have to paint things from scratch. Actually, it's smarter to use a lot of photographs if you have the ability to. But like I said, I'm trying to use this as an excuse to teach you a couple things on top of the fact. So first things first, I painted in what is a rough form of branches. It looks pretty crappy, but you just grab a brush. You're not too worried about it, too worried about the thickness or whatever. You just kind of paint it, just kind of go over, make some bumps, some splits. If you need to actually just put an image underneath and trace it so it's more realistic, then go ahead and do that. But then what you do is, and this is something I love to do when I am using lines, is everyone always thinks you have to paint your line first and make it right. No, paint the line and then erase it. So grab the eraser tool and come in and start erasing things to get a closer shape to what you want. So you can come in here and start erasing. So I've already done that, and I'll show you what happens. So here it is. This is me when I've done erasing it. All right. So I've kind of took that original line, went in and made it just a little bit sharper, made the more realistic bumps and movements in the branches and so on, just by taking basically the existing line, grabbing the eraser tool, and just erasing little parts of it. Right. So that's how I did that. Now the next step was I did what is known as a pattern overlay on top of it. So you see right here, I actually created a texture, a tiling texture. So let's open that up. I'll show you real quick. So here's the branch demo. Whoops, no, that's the wrong one. That was a different demo that I was doing. Let me click on the branch right here, bark branch. Okay, so I found this image on the internet. I made it tile. And then I use this as a pattern. So to use something as a pattern in Photoshop, once you make a tiling texture, as I did here, you can kind of come up to the top and you go to edit, and then you can change this to define, or not change it, but click on define pattern, and then call it whatever you want. This just is the default name of whatever your initial image is. We'll just leave it and I'll hit OK. So what happens there is now you have a pattern that you can choose to use. Now what I did was I took this original line, so this one right here, I double clicked it, and I went over to where it said pattern overlay, okay, and then chose in this little drop down the pattern of the branch texture that I just made, that tiling texture. Now you can move it around, line it up any way you want, increase it or decrease the amount that it tiles until it looks kind of fairly realistic. You want to be careful you don't go too much one way or the other. Get the detail that you want in it, and as soon as it looks good, you just hit OK and you move on. So that's kind of what happened there. Okay, so that's what this pattern overlay branch section looks like. So you're getting there, but it looks real flat. So we got to add some dimension to it. So what I did was, my next step was I added bevel and emboss. So you can see right here that I put a bevel and emboss on the whole thing. I have it set to, just so you see some of the settings here. That's our pattern overlay. Let's click on bevel and emboss. So I have it as an inner bevel. I have the technique set to smooth. I do a contour, choose contour, and I choose this rounded contour because that's closer to what, you know, branches will look like, and anti-aliasing, so that we get a little bit of a smoother contour. And then I just kind of play with the settings, the size, all these other things until I get what I want. And then you can play around with the highlights and the shadows. So down here, you can move your slider around until the highlights or shadows are as bright or as dark as you want them to be. I tend to be somewhere in the middle. Like, make it so that the shadows aren't too dark and the highlights aren't too light, because you're going to paint other ones in. Because right now everything's consistent, like same thickness, and it looks a little odd if it's the same thickness when one thing like this is really thick and this branch is really thin. So what we want to do is we want to kind of manipulate that after the fact. So once you have, you know, the bevel and emboss that you want, you hit OK, and then you'll take basically a new layer here, and just blank brand new layer. You'll select it by holding down Control, select these two layers, right click, and then merge the layers. So basically what you're doing is now you've merged in all of this detail. So you merged in the bevel and emboss, and you merged in the pattern overlay. And the reason why that's important is because we're going to paint on this layer, and you can't paint on it when it has those effects on it. You won't actually see anything happen at all. So you do have to flatten the effects down in the layer. So what I did was, from there, as I actually took the dodge and burn tools, as we see over here, dodge, which actually creates, if you can see right here, I can paint and highlight. So if I come in here, I can choose to paint highlights in wherever I want. So if I want to make some highlights, make it a little bit brighter over here, I can do that, make it a little bit brighter here, and so on. So you can actually go in and paint some highlights, right? And then of course if you choose burn, same concept but darken. So I can make some shadows darker. Maybe I can make this part kind of look like it bends in just a little bit more, play off of that, right? And so on. If you don't like something, you know, just Control Z it or whatever. But then you can vary up your highlights and your shadows so that basically you get more variation. So after I did that, it looked like this. So you can see right here where I've kind of played with it. I have some really tight highlights here to kind of accentuate certain elements of it. And so it kind of looks like this. And then that's basically it. So there's your branch. So you can paint that. This is showing you, once again, to paint something semi-realistic from scratch, but I don't recommend necessarily that you do that. You can use photos or whatever, but these are just some techniques that can help you create stuff or add, you know, a little bit of value to something that already exists. Maybe you want, you know, you like this texture, but it just needs a little bit more. Then you can paint in that extra detail. All right. So once you do that, of course, you need to add the leaves. So if let me just shut this off for a moment. I'm going to turn on the leaves here. So I did a couple of things with the leaves, and actually this is the leaves bottom and leaves top. I'm going to hide these for a moment. I'm going to turn on this. And so this was an example of, here's the original image of leaves that I found. So they are on a little bit of a stem. Okay, so you don't want to just get one leaf. You're going to be there forever trying to populate this tree with just one leaf at a time. So I found like a kind of a cluster of leaves. Whatever tree you're trying to do, find the leaves that are appropriate for that tree. Same process as I showed with the fern. You just cut it out. You get that, you paste it in there. Cool. So then I got to make it to the right size. So what I did was I made it to the right size. You see right here, but then I made variations of it, and using a perspective tool I made the variations of it looking like it's going off into space and coming in towards the viewer, so that we're getting some sort of dimension, so it isn't everything just flat leaves. It doesn't really make a lot of sense if everything is perfectly flat. So in order to do that, I'll show you real quick. If I grab the perspective, this one right here, if you want, you make some duplicates of it, right? So I made 3 duplicates, and then on 2 of them I changed them. But with the perspective tool, all you have to do is come up to edit, come over here to perspective warp, just make a box around it. All right, so we'll just go, this is the initial perspective, and that's cool. So that's what we want. And then once you have that, which I didn't want to click on that, but once you have that, you can hit enter. Then it's going to basically say now you can manipulate it. So we can shut this off, and now I can manipulate and have it can either go off into space, right, or the other way. If you flatten these out and then make these go in, you can have it go the other direction where it kind of looks like it's coming towards you. So that's kind of what I did with the warp, the perspective warp, and then I just hit enter, and then I use that. Okay, so that's just kind of how I did that. You can make variations. I'll show you an example. Like right here is variations where, you know, I can go in and change the colors. So not only that, now I'm not going to use these, but you do want the color variation to be slight. If I was actually used all three of these that I show here, that would be too much, but just some hue and saturation layers can easily vary some of these leaves. Okay, so that's just a little bit of concept behind how the leaves work. So what I did was I went in and I added some leaves underneath. So you actually have two folders. I have leaves tops and leaf bottom. Leaves bottom is so that, and let me turn the branch back on, so that I can put some leaves that go under the branch. So I just kind of went in there and moved some around, rotate them, make sure they're mostly going the same direction, following the shape of the branch. And that's the wrong branch layer. There we go. That's better. Following the shape that the branch is moving. You don't want the leaves to be kind of going this way and that. It's just going to look really crazy if the leaves are going everywhere. Leaves tend to kind of flow in the same direction with each other. So there's a slight variation in rotation, but not too much. And then I have another layer of leaves on the top. So these are over the other things, and this is the branch. Let me hide this branch and turn this one on. Now you can see them top and bottom, right? So clearly now these are over the top of the branch and those are underneath. Don't go too crazy with your leaves. This should be enough. Same thing, you can make like a green background layer. Come over to channels, make an alpha. With this, when you have this though, your alpha is going to be a little bit more complex when you make the selection, because what you have to do is you have to select the branch, then you have to hold down, so holding control and selecting the thumbnail, you select that. Then you have to hold down shift, and I'm going to expand out these leaves here. And then just keep adding to the selection. Hold down control and shift and just keep going until you've grabbed every set of leaves, which is why, like, if you did one leaf at a time, you're going to be here forever making this selection. Right, so I should have, I missed one of them, don't know where it is, but whatever, you get the idea. So once you do that, of course, channels, new layer, fill that in, save it out as a 32-bit targa, awesome, and then apply it to the model just the same way as you saw in the other demos, and then you can put it in here. And so you can see this is actually that same texture in action right here, and I actually have triangles, so I went in triangles because you know, it only needed a triangle really to do this. But you can kind of see if I just move this one little piece off that I made a bunch of these where I took the major branch and then took in these tiny ones and broke them up. So if I was actually go into the geometry here, and let me convert that to poly. So I think I have this set as group. Let me ungroup. Okay, there we go. So now you can see that these are just separate models, okay, and just each one of these are their own separate triangle, and I try to make them look like they're kind of coming out from all these different directions, and that's how you really sell the tree, is to have them going from all these different directions. You don't want them all facing the same way. It'll look real silly. So this, I just rotate them in all these various directions. You don't need to do a triangle. I was trying to be extra, like saving on polys. You can just do a just a normal one plane with no other cuts. And you see this, that I don't actually add cuts to my branches here. I'm actually just having them all be flat, and but I'm just letting the kind of the variation be more set in all of these rotations of different polys that I'm doing that. Now, one last thing I did want to point out that I kind of forgot before, you kind of see right here I only painted half of the texture, and I have my rulers on my guide, so I had my guide snap here so that it kind of bleeded over. The whole point of this would be that you would paint one texture up here of branches and then another one down here so that your whole tree isn't just one branch. But to be fair, if you actually look at this, it doesn't look too bad when it is all just one branch. So if you do want to add variation, that's fine. Maybe you have two different types of trees, so you can make branches for one set of trees on the top and then branches for a different set of trees on the bottom, and then they're just one texture. Or you could, in your texture, just do a 512 by 1024 texture and then just do the one branch, right, and save on space. So anyway, that's just a little bit of understanding of how to do a tree. Hopefully, once again, this video helped you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.